The following audio content is a talk from Convergence, a service for young adults at University Presbyterian Church in Seattle, Washington. For more information, please visit our website at upc.org/young adults.
Isn't it? I mean, it's one of those times where it is, it's full of joy and sorrow. I mean, it's full of surprise and disappointment. I mean, I'm probably not the only one, right? I'm guessing I'm not the only one in this room that opened up something on Christmas Day. We're like, oh, I love it. Is the receipt in there? Right? You're thinking, man, I was hoping for something way better than that. But it's also this time where, we spend a lot of time with family, and yet it also can be a time of great loneliness for some of us, even if we're with family. Sometimes our families, a lot of us have come back from Thanksgiving, our families can be places in which there can be great joy, but also there can be sometimes a challenge in there. One of the traditions we have for Thanksgiving, after Thanksgiving, is we go down to the Macy's they light a big star down there. It's Westlake Center right downtown. They light a big star, they light a Christmas tree, and then they actually shoot fireworks off the top of Macy's. It's pretty sweet. We go down there every year, and it's fun. It's carnival. I mean, it's crazy. There are people with different signs that are running around. I mean, it's either you're looking on one side was repent or go to hell, or you're going to hell, and then on the other side it's buy more stuff. Right? It's just the mix. You're just like, where am I right now? A bunch of people, I've never actually seen it before, a bunch of people that were just like, we've got to support the economy, buy more stuff. I was like, bold. Are you joking? Or I'm not really sure what's going on, but it's one of those. We have a lot of fun. We get popcorn, and there's those kind of special moments where I got to hold Noah, and we're watching the fireworks shoot off the top of Macy's, and we had a great time. And then we drove home. Right, holidays and driving, and it's crazy. We get in, and of course it takes us forever to get out, because there's traffic, and everyone's trying to get out at the same time, and it's kind of that time of the day where the boys are melting down, and so it's everywhere from like laughing to yelling loudly to crying to screaming. I mean, it's all of it together, right? And by this time, my head is just about to explode. And I kind of can't take it. So I turn up the radio. And so, of course, we actually have our mix on. We've gotten some of our Christmas CDs. So it's like a baby, it's cold outside, or some sort of Elvis remix. You know what it's like. It's like, how is this Christmas? This feels dirty. Anyway, so, baby, it's cold outside. I'm turning it up because I just don't want to hear the boys in the back. And so you got this coming in, and they're screaming. And then this is my own fault. I was a sucker, right? There's vendors that are going around, and they were swinging around those kind of glow stick things, which, lame. But then afterwards, they brought out lightsabers, like blue ones, and they were like, they're cheap, but they're like blue lightsabers, and I was a total sucker. Noah wanted one. I was like, I would want one, let's be honest. I'm going to play with it later tonight. So, I got a couple of them. So they're in the back. So not only are they screaming, but they're swinging this thing around. But at least they're not hitting me in the head, right? So as long as you don't hit me, as long as you're focused on each other, great. So they're swinging these things around. And on the way home, it's like, screaming, flashing back here, this music that I'm trying to turn up. I'm just like, this is Christmas. Merry Christmas. It's like I'm infuriated, and I just want to go home, and I have a headache. And it can't get any better than this. Except it does. Because not only do I see the blue lights of the swords behind me, but suddenly I see blue and red lights behind me. And I'm thinking, awesome. Just a little tip for you guys. Apparently, blue lights flashing inside of a car is illegal. Didn't know that. I'm sitting there thinking, we turn down the radio. Boys, let's turn off the swords. Daddy got you a present, guys. I got a ticket for your stocking. We're not going to get toys this year. No, anyways, we didn't. I was just thinking, that's all we need right now, right? Is a big ticket. Thankfully, he just gave us a stern warning, and we were very penitent. Oh, we're so sorry. But it's just hilarious. I mean, it is what it is. But this is what, in some ways, it's what life is, right? I mean, life is never sort of this perfect moment in which everything is great. It's this grab bag. It's this good, bad, annoying, but somehow hopeful at the same time, and then a little bit of joy in there, and it goes back and forth. And I think what I love about Christmas and I love about Advent is that perhaps more than any other time of year, it's that moment which we sort of slow down and we go, the eternal Word, the sovereign God, the one who reigns on high, who is above and outside of everything, actually enters the world that I live in. The messy one. The one that is difficult. The one where, there's not easy answers. And yet He brings truth. The one in which it doesn't always seem like right wins. And yet there's hope for justice. One in which, it seems like sometimes it can be pretty dark amongst all the lights. The glittering lights that we see on the streets. Sometimes it can be pretty dark. That's the world I often live in. And yet it's one in which light comes in. We remember at this time of year that this thing called the Incarnation, which is it's a big word. But it's a doctrine. It's a doctrine of the church, and this is an important word for us to wrestle with, because what a doctrine does, and this is a professor of mine explained this to me in a way that I just thought was brilliant. It helped me begin to get it. A doctrine is not something. It's often we think it's like something that you kind of come down and the church believes it and you've got to believe it, and it's true. We're called to believe in some basic doctrines. Incarnation is one of those. But a doctrine is not something that gets rid of sort of all questions. What it does is it holds together two things that want to split. Two things that don't belong together. Things that we would go, they don't belong in the same category, and yet if we split them, that's not true either. So we somehow have to hold them together. And so with the Incarnation, it's this, that Jesus comes down, God, fully human. Doesn't make sense. You want to split those things. They don't belong together. The sovereign God and messy human experience, they don't go together. And yet somehow in Jesus they do. And the church wrestled with this. And they wrestled with kind of early errors in which people said, it'd be easier to split them. Let's split them. And so there were groups that were saying, you know what? Jesus actually never came. I mean, He was good. It was God that came down. And He never actually came down. It was sort of a phantom. It's like we were all hallucinating for a couple of years. He only seemed to die because God does not do that. He doesn't do that. And they said, no. We can't go that way, because here's the thing. It's coming out of this belief that somehow this world doesn't matter. It was this belief that the best thing that we can do is to try to escape our bodies, because fundamentally our bodies don't really matter, and really they're evil, and it's like they're a jail cell. So if we can sort of escape into the spiritual, because God would never want anything to do with this world. And they're like, it's just not true. So we have to hold this thing together. God and human in the person of Christ. We're going to have a couple people come up and share in a moment, but there's just three things. There's so much we could say about this idea of the Incarnation, that the scriptures that we're going to be reading tonight, that we've already read. Some of you might recognize that famous passage out of John, beginning of John chapter 1, which we hear that the Word, this eternal, like in some ways you could say concept, but it's not concept, it's a person. But the Word becomes flesh and He dwells among us. Eugene Peterson says he moved into God moved into the neighborhood, full of grace and truth. Three things that strike me from these passages in which we got this doctrine of the Incarnation. The first, it says something about this life. That this life matters. That this world matters. That the messy stuff of our life isn't something to escape. It's not that God just looks down and goes, I don't want anything to do with that. But He actually puts on skin and steps into our experience. And I love that. That there's no part of life that is too dark or too messy that God says, I can't have anything to do with it. But He says, you know what? I'm going to actually step down into it. There's nothing so messy that God says, I can't be bothered with that. Because He would say, yes, there is a spirit in you. I want you to know that it will get regenerated. That to be fully human is a physical and emotional, but also spiritual reality and a social reality. If I can bring life to your spirit, it's going to bring life to the rest of who you are. But this life, this place matters. I created this world to be good. Well, it also says something about God, doesn't it? Jesus comes and he begins to talk about the sovereign God, the God of the heavens. He says, this is my Father. He addresses God as his Father. Even by that, we have the sense that regardless of whether we feel like we have great fathers or not great fathers, there's something in that. There's a relationality that Jesus reveals to us that this sovereign God that is out there, there's something, what is true about him is that there's a relationality to him. And if there's a relationality, there has to be love. That somehow love is at the center of all things. And if that's true, then God has to be motivated by that love, a deep love. To not stand far off, because He doesn't need us. He doesn't have to come down. But in a way He does, because if He's motivated by love, He can't stand. Just like I can't watch my kids do something that will totally hurt them. I mean, there are times where I let them fall because that's how they learn how to walk. But I can't see them sit there and cry. I have to step in. And so He says, I'm going to enter into this messy reality even though I don't have to, because I love this world. And not only that, I'm going to lay aside everything that I have rightful claim to, and I'm going to come in not as one to demand things from people, but as a servant. There's something pretty powerful about this Christian God. Not just any God, not just a concept, not just a divine being, not just a power, but a very personal God that is willing to serve. The last thing is this, is that we are told that Jesus comes and He gets this title, Emmanuel. And Emmanuel is a title that was used by some of the prophets hundreds of years beforehand, and it means God with us. And there was this time where they were looking forward to the God that they knew, that God would come back, it would be a part, would be present. Like, glory in some ways means the weighty presence of God. What we hear from John is that weighty presence means grace and truth come together. Two things that so often don't go together. And yet when they do, transformation happens. Change happens. New life happens. New beginnings happen. When grace and truth can be held together. It's when we talk about this idea of shalom. We talked about shalom as this idea of peace, a proactive peace in which truth, beauty, good, and plenty break out in ways that we can see. It's what God intended for us. But it comes when you pull together grace and truth. And that brings life to us, but it also challenges us. Truth says I can't just walk away. Truth says I can't just say, well, that doesn't matter. But grace also says I can't write somebody off either. It brings us into difficult places that we would rather not worry about. It makes us hang in there with people that, oh man, I would rather just write them off. But grace says give them another chance. But don't turn a blind eye either. Well, that's what I encourage you as you think about some of these passages through Advent to be thinking about what does it matter that Jesus showed up as a little baby? If you want, in the back, there's some scripture that you can read through. If you want kind of a reading way to get into some different scriptures, maybe scriptures that you're not used to thinking about during Christmas. You can find some of those in the back. But what I want to do now is I want to invite some folks up just to begin to maybe kind of put some. That's a skeleton, but let's sort of maybe put some flesh on it as we kind of just have a conversation around what does this maybe look like? What are the implications of this? So I want to invite David Brenner and Matt Whitney, wherever those guys are. And would you give them a hand? You hear from me and others quite a bit, but what I wanted to do is I wanted to invite two guys from very different places to be able to come and just sort of reflect on these kinds of passages, on this idea of Christ kind of entering into our human mess from where they stand. And vocationally, they're coming from different places. They're people you need to meet regardless. Matt's been around here for a long time. He's going to tell you in a moment, he's part of this big Advent kind of push on creating an image that will sort of follow our sermon series on Sundays. You can see it downstairs on most days, and he's going to be painting it. You will see him painting next week, and he can tell you a little bit about that in a moment. But he's been a part of this community for a long time. Good, you need to get to know him. He's a good guy. David Brenner's been around here even longer. And David and his wife have really served in a lot of ways around it. I don't know how many different things you guys have done around this place, but thank you for all that you've done. They have been a part of so many different committees and task forces and all that kind of stuff. That's exhausting to even say, but you've brought real blessing to us as you've taken on some hard issues. I know. David is actually practices law. But what I want to do is Matt, I want to start with you, and you can grab that. And so first of all, tell us a little bit kind of about the Advent Project. Tell us about kind of how it came about and what you're doing with it.
Yeah, well, I'm a painter, and so UPC has invited me to work on this painting for Advent. And, the idea of Advent is God with us, God coming into being with us. And so the idea behind the painting is that the painting would be created. You would see the images sort of come into form and shape amongst community. So this is actually really exciting. So instead of like me making a painting in my studio by myself and then dropping it off and saying, here's your Christmas art, you all kind of get to be a part of that process with me. And so I'm working on this painting, and it's 3 large canvases with the theme of Advent and George's sermon theme of yesterday, today, and forever. Working on that during various worship services, including conversions. I'll be here next week working on it, and probably the week after as well.
If you guys want a sneak peek tonight, he's going to be at the inn. After this, you can sneak right across the hall and get a sense. But he'll be here the next couple of weeks. I think it's great. It's fun. I told him he's better watch his paintbrushes because Caleb went up and 2.5-year-old. He's like, I want paint. You put a paintbrush near that kid, and he is going to do his own little creative project. But anyways, listen. What you're doing when you're painting is you're bringing something non-visible visible. You're bringing something that we can tangibly see from something that it was intangible, whether it's kind of a vision or for you or you're commissioned for something. But tell me, why does that, what does that matter for you when you think about making something visible, especially as you think about kind of faith? Why does that matter?
Sure. Well, I think it matters thinking about Christ coming into form as a baby and thinking about the Word made flesh. God took the Word, He took the law, and He made it material. And when He created us, He created man and woman in His image. And so I think that a little bit of that is inherent in us as well, that we have this need and this desire to be creative people. And so for me, it's always been a calling to sort of pursue that path of making art. And for me, being a believer, and what I want to do with my work is to acknowledge that we do live in darkness, but live in truth. A lot like the scripture reading you had about the people dwelled in darkness and saw a great light. And you commented on that as well, that we live in crummy times. It's one thing after another. I live in Greenwood and dealt with all these arsons this last fall, and the police officers that were murdered last Sunday. It's a horrible place sometimes. But we have this truth that God came and dwelled among us and sacrificed Himself to redeem us, and that made this world good. And it wasn't just for those people 2,000 years ago. It was for us today. And so for me, when I make art and the images that I create, it's about just being in that, living in that truth, and trying to make images that communicate that and that people can experience.
So in each image, you are trying to kind of bring out both grace and truth, right? And
Yeah.
I think you were saying before, sometimes there can be a sense that maybe your images can be dark. Why is it important to bring out the dark for you?
I think it's an acknowledgement that we're broken people, and that we're very imperfect, and that's the good news is that we don't have to be perfect. That God redeemed us and gave us salvation through grace, and that's the great truth about us. And I think I know that's what sustains me, and that's what I want to express as an artist. That my images might not always be nice or pretty. They might be more jarring rather than comforting. But there's always, my hope is that there's always some hope in the work as well.
Why is it important for you, when you think about art, about it maybe even being jarring? Why is that important? Why does that seem to be an integral part to what you do?
Well, I think that as Christians, we tend to seek comfort as well, and comfort, and we should, but we also have a tendency to neglect the reality around us. And even as an artist in the church, I see the church tends to gravitate towards older images. For example, the Advent piece that I'm making here is not a nativity scene, right? And there's no Christmas trees in the painting, and those are comforting images, and they're images that people came up with, in the past, and and they're valuable and they're valid. But I just feel like we need to sort of come into faith into our own today, here and now, and for me, that's what the image making is about, is trying to retell that story today and to make it truthful and real.
I think it is. I think holding together grace and truth. I think about this all the time because I think it is so difficult. But I think it's what I think rings honest. And maybe I hear that as we've talked before, and even as you're talking tonight, that we can't just say the world is dark and be hopeless. We're not hopeless. But if we're honest, we look out. I mean, what you just shared. I mean, what's going on in our own city right now? That's real. And to turn a blind eye is to kind of slip into some place unreality. And yet also we live with hope. And we live with a sense of grace. And we live with a sense of that there is something happening. God is leading us out somehow. The light is breaking in. So it seems like when you pull those two things together, that's what I loved about your images, is that it does have that sense of both. Hold it together. So for me, it has a sense of feeling honest. Share a little bit about your process a little bit. As you think about kind of bringing grace and truth together, what's your process?
Well, when I come up with imagery, I keep a sketchbook, and it's personal imagery. I have influences of mythology, and the Pacific Northwest has a very rich tradition of painters, and so I try to kind of follow in their footsteps. But as far as imagery goes, I work in a narrative style, so I use people and animals and places and try to tell a story in my work. And so I have an idea in mind, and I come up with these images, and I start to work on them. I start to incorporate them into a composition, and then that's half of the process. So the second half of the process is stepping back from the canvas and listening. And so in that sense, it starts to become sort of a prayerful conversation with God. I've done my part on the canvas, and then the artwork sort of becomes its own thing. And I try to step back and just listen to the work. And, sometimes I pray directly to God for inspiration or what have you. But sometimes, a lot of the time, it's just sitting and staring and meditating. Excuse me. And so it becomes kind of this back and forth, push-pull conversation with the art object. And and the artwork can change as I go. And themes and ideas can also come to the surface, things that I hadn't intended. And, that's just part of the fun of it. It's just a very open process. And it's open to interpretation, not just my interpretation, but yours and the viewer who experiences the artwork.
Yeah, cool. Thanks. David, Dave, why don't you share with us a little bit, just real briefly, where do you work, and what do you do, what kind of law do you practice?
I work for a firm of about 60 lawyers downtown in Seattle. It's called Riddell Williams. And most of my career I've been a litigator. You get ready to go to trial. You hardly ever go to trial these days. And in the last couple of years, I've also become the head of our nonprofit practice group, which has been an interesting and exciting new place to in my practice. You know, I was thinking I'm not so different from you. I mean, I'm certainly older, and we have a beard, beards. And I was thinking about what you were saying about telling a story with your paintings, because that's really what you do as a lawyer, especially as a litigator. You tell stories. You're hired to tell a story from a certain point of view. And you tell that story by writing briefs and by standing in a courtroom and making arguments. So your medium is paint, and my medium is words. The facts that I'm handed and how I use those facts to tell a story for the person who's hired me to get their point across. So that's really what I do, is paint with words.
We were kind of laughing beforehand because we were sharing, like, if anybody walks into a mess, your job is basically to walk into messes. I mean, there wouldn't be a job for lawyers if there was no mess. If there was no argument, right?
That's very true. You know, a lot of times you find yourself after interviewing a new client in a situation thinking, wow, you know, why do I have to deal with this? And then you think, wow, I'm sure glad that mess happened, because that's my job, is to take care of that problem. But that's also sort of the downside of being a lawyer. I mean, you're constantly cleaning up messes, or you're trying to prevent them from happening. So there's this concept of risk management. Much of what I do, as I said, has to do with insurance. I sue insurance companies for policyholders when they don't honor claims. So it's, it can be small family-owned businesses, or it could be Microsoft or Puget Sound Energy and big corporations. So you have litigation over that, and you're trying to get the insurance company to do what they should do. But then the other side of it is you also try to prevent bad things from happening. And this is really pervasive in the law. You know, whether you're a litigator or you're a corporate lawyer writing contracts, you're always trying to think of what could go wrong and try to avoid that happening, or at least not becoming a problem for your client, because you write the contract to take that into account. Or if you're litigating and you've got this story, you know, there's never a perfect story, and there's always bad facts to deal with, or bad witnesses, or people who aren't very attractive on your side of the case. And so then you try to manage the risk in that situation by controlling the story in some way. I think that's the hard part for lawyers. One of the reasons lawyers are actually sort of notoriously unhappy is that you're trying to control the uncontrollable all the time, especially as a litigator. Either you're trying to think of what could go wrong and take care of that, so that's kind of an inherently negative way to think about life, or you're trying to create this package and plug all the leaks in it as you go along. And, you know, when I think about transcendence and about how does Jesus make a difference, how does it make a difference that Jesus came down 2,000 years ago, or that he's here with us now because he said, I'm here with you always, and when he was leaving? You know, it's realizing that you're never in control, and it's just foolish to think that you can be. And just handing the issue over to him. The other thing that I think about often with Jesus is, when I think about it in my practice, is how he always had the right word to deal with angry people. You know, he didn't necessarily make people less angry. Sometimes people became more angry after they talked to him. They didn't like what they heard. But he diffused so many situations, and he cut right to the heart of the situation. And so as a lawyer, you know, what a great model to have the right word at the right moment. A truthful word, not just what the client wants to hear, but the word that can heal that situation. So that's, you know, a perfect model.
I want you to talk a little bit about more about grace and truth as you think about how does that kind of help you kind of within practice. How does that guide you and lead you? And I think that's a great example. I think of lawyers. I also think of like police officers. I mean, we ask in some ways your job, or we ask you to walk into situations in which we would never want to go. I think about my friend who's a police officer, and I think if anybody needs kind of the wisdom of the Spirit, grace and truth together, the right word, it's the people that we ask to walk into domestic violence situations, to walk into situations that are really, really difficult, and to somehow exercise power in such a way as to diffuse a situation, but also to not abuse that power. And so to walk into arguments, so that's a hard place to be at. It's a hard place to be in when you're wrestling with truth, and you're in an argumentative situation. You're in a situation that sometimes can be combative. So how does sort of grace and truth and holding those things together, how has that kind of helped, kind of guide you?
Well, if you have a good case, you're fine with truth, right? If you have a bad case, you're hoping for grace. So that's certainly one level. But as you pointed out, John, in the law, our whole legal system is set up, especially in litigation, as an adversary process. It's a fight. It's designed to be a fight between two parties, or sometimes many parties, each of which has a story to tell. And the notion is that by having everybody do the best job on their story, the truth will out. The finder of fact will determine between these two stories what the truth is, and often it's somewhere in between. So it's it's a battle. It's a designed battle, and especially in more recent years, as the bar has gotten to be so big, you don't really often meet the same lawyers on the other side unless you're in this particular specialized area where they're a smaller number. So you don't have the need to build relationships with those lawyers, and you can just fight the battle in a scorched earth way because you're probably not going to see that lawyer again, odds are. So there's no grace in that. The truth might come out, but there's no grace in that situation. And the really great places to practice are ones where really good cases are where the lawyers understand that you can have a relationship, you can be friends, you can appreciate each other's gifts and skills even while you're trying to outwit the other side. That's the grace. And truth can come out better in that situation too, because it's just not this complete hostile thing. So that's kind of like what Jesus did too. As I said, he found the right word to diffuse so many situations. People who were trying to set him up, Pharisees, the Sadducees, the lawyers, scribes, the lawyers of their time, they gave him puzzles, and he came back with answers that they marveled at. It wasn't just wordplay. He cut to what they were trying to do and cut through it and gave them truth. And wow, if you could do that as a lawyer, I mean, that's your goal. You want the jury to feel that way when you're arguing your case. But it's a real challenge to build a relationship and seek the truth in a gracious way.
Yeah, thanks. I want to ask Kelly if she would come up. Thank you, dude. Where's Kelly at? Oh, she's over there. Hey, right here. Got a little spot for you right here. Hey, I wanted Kelly to come up just to share with us briefly, partly because some of you may or may not. Kelly joined us a few weeks ago. Some of you probably recognize her, some of you don't. I want you to have a chance to get to know her. She joined us as our admin assistant. She's here 18 hours a week. And so I want this opportunity just for folks to get to know you a little bit, but also to touch on something we were talking about the other day. But first of all, would you just share with us a little bit, where did you come from, school, kind of what are you doing now? How you even connected to UPC?
Yes. Well, I grew up in Colorado Springs, Colorado, and moved out here to go to school at UW. Actually, mainly to be on the track team. John had mentioned earlier that I was a pole vaulter in the UW track team. And anyway, so graduated 2008, and last year did an internship at UMinn. So worked over at the inn. And did that whole thing for the year. Met John that way. Anyway, so I guess that's kind of my connection to UPC. And then now
What are you doing now? I mean, you're working 18 hours a week. I'm slave driving you.
It's true. Well, with the rest of my time, I'm actually doing a number of things, but the main thing is I'm training for pole vaulting again, just seeing how far I can go. So decided that I missed it last year and have to keep doing it. So that's kind of what I'm doing right now.
This is awesome. Well, tell us, one of the first things, when I first met Kelly, I often will get first impressions with people, and they'll just stick in my mind. But we were driving out to a retreat in which we were beginning the year with you men, and it was so obvious that you had this heart for Latin America. We began to hear a little bit about that. And then you even got a chance to go travel. And you just got back from that, down in Latin America. Took a bunch of time. What is it about Latin America that has captured your heart? We were chatting a little bit about this. What is it that keeps drawing you back, that you would spend a bunch of money to travel there if you could travel anywhere in the world?
Yeah. Well, it's kind of a complicated question, I suppose. But I would say the initial attraction to me, when I was in 8th grade, I took a missions trip to Mexico, did the classic build a house, that sort of thing. However, I went down there and just fell in love with the people down there, fell in love with the culture, and was fascinated with the language. Couldn't tell you what it was, but it was just like trying to learn Spanish was like this really cool thing for me. And so I went back. I've been down to Mexico several times doing the same kind of project, and each time just fell in love with it more. And I've spent some time in Costa Rica and Nicaragua, and again went down there and just like, I have to move down here. I don't know why, but I need to. And so I guess kind of like...
And we were talking yesterday, and I was like, great. What? Why?
Yeah, exactly.
Why?
I'm still trying to figure that out. No. I guess let me tell you a story about... this last time. I just got back from Peru. I spent 5 weeks down there. And I think the story kind of captures what it is about Latin America that captures my heart. But I went with a couple of friends, and we had traveled mainly southern Peru, but we spent some time at Lake Titicaca, which is a lake that sits in between Peru and Bolivia at 12,500 feet. So it's a super high lake. And we decided we're going to take this long boat ride out to an island and spend the night on this island. And the island had it's like 7 square kilometers. There's maybe 2,000 people at the most that lived there. Electricity had been introduced to the island in 1996, and so a lot of people still didn't even have electricity when we were there. And you just get there, and it's just this incredibly rich culture where people are still speaking the native Incan language, practicing their native religion from the Incans, and just kind of living in this world that's kind of escaped almost the modern day world. But anyway, we spent the night there, and while we were there, we had nothing to do but explore the island, talk to the people that we were with. They had invited us into their home and cooked meals for us and that sort of stuff, and just hang out with people because there's no TV, there's no nothing. You have nothing to do. And while I was sitting there, in the middle of the night, and it's pitch black, there's no lights around, so you can see all of the stars. It was beautiful. I just kind of was thinking about I was just I love this place. And I think what it came down to was realizing that these people lived in this beautiful community, in a community that I feel is hard to fully appreciate here in the U.S. We just live in a little bit more individualistic society, and for them, this community was their lifeline. And it wasn't about, you have all these people are just living on this island. They have nowhere to go. It wasn't about making the most money and getting the biggest job and that sort of stuff, because everybody had to work for each other, and you had to grow crops so that everyone could eat. You had to farm so everyone could use the animals, and they were big on making textiles, so making these textiles. And it was just this idea that they just had this dependency on their community, where a lot of times I feel we miss that in the U.S., and that We understand that community is important for sure, and we always seek it out, but we don't need it as much as they needed it there, because without their neighbors and their family to support them, they couldn't do anything. They just don't have those resources. And so I guess it's just kind of that culture that just attracts me to it. And this is just kind of like the one picture, I think, that summarizes why I love Latin America and why I want to go down there more and just get to know the people and the culture that's down there and understand this community that is dependent on relationships and people. So,
awesome. I challenge you, stick around after this or go out wherever you're going, but grab someone and begin to talk about what is it that you love about this time of year, the holidays. What is it that you hate? And begin to see. I bet there's probably some common themes. And then I would challenge you to think about, Jesus sort of stepped out of what he could have done to enter into our reality. And so I would encourage you to listen, to think about the discipline. I'm going to slow down just a little bit and listen and expect. God stepped into this world. So where is he at now? Where is he moving by his Spirit? And then where can I then take a little bit of a risk and join him? To enter in, to pause, to be present in a place and not just rush off to the next thing. Maybe even to choose relationship over something that we find is fun. Maybe we think it's important. But really, it pulls us out of relationship. Choose relationship. Choose to linger with somebody. Choose to pause for a moment, to let a conversation happen. Seek relationship. It's that time of year we love. We're drawn to it. And I think in some ways we're drawn to it because God gave us no other gift than his presence. So challenge to think, how can we then be present to each other? I'm going to ask the worship band if they come up. And Anna, would you thank all these guys?